All right, so welcome everybody and buen appetit as well, those of you that are eating. So my name is Dr. Dulce Cruz. I work at San Luis University Hospital. And thank you. I would like to thank the organizers for having me to talk about this topic that I like very much. So we are going to talk about money, something that is it's of interest of everybody here in the audience and the ones connected as well. But I would like to know my audience. So first of all, how many of you are attending physicians? Okay, residents? I see. And I'm going over to the camera here. Any doctors down in the audience connected? All right. Other healthcare professionals, just raise your hands. Like social workers or nurses? No? All right. So probably I missed when they raised their hand at the beginning. I would like to start by, first of all, I have no disclosures. And yeah, let's go over. Oh. Not personally, but I have to say that the Investor Protection Institute provided some funds for me to be here. Okay, this is not I would like to start by defining what is EIFFE. You will see this abbreviation all over my slides. So it stands for Elder Investment Fraud and Financial Exploitation, and I read upon. So this is a program, a CME program, series of courses to educate medical professionals about what are the risk factors for elderly people to have financial abuse, and also how to assess it and what kind of steps as providers we should be doing. It's a program that has been provided in more than 30 states, and finally last summer was provided in San Luis in the state of Missouri, and this is the second time we presented. These are the multiple collaborators. And now, this is my headline. So if you fall asleep in the middle of this, hopefully you will remember this slide, okay? Elder abuse can be prevented by anybody here in this room, okay? Anybody here can help prevent this elder investment fraud. Now, how many of you have seen a patient that has been a victim of this? Okay, you can see a couple. All right, I see a couple also. Let me tell you a story. Me too, I have seen a patient, so I will tell you a story soon, but first, as this Mr. Rodney says, this can happen to anybody, anyone. So I had this patient, her name, we'll call her Miss Maria. Miss Maria was a 80-something-year-old lady. After we were done talking about her arthritis, she said, "Doctor, they stole from me." And I was like, well, thinking probably they just got her bag or something. But then I asked her, how did it happen? And she said, well, I got a phone call and they had a great offer. And then a couple of days later, the bank called me that there were some strange things in my bank account. So sooner or later, I figured out that there was a scam. That phone call was a scam. And I'm really embarrassed. These were her words. I'm really embarrassed. So I called my social worker and asked her to come and see the patient. But when I went ahead and talked to her son who was there with her, and I asked him, has she ever had any problems managing her money, paying her bills? She said, no. He said, no, never. It's the first time anything like this happened. But a question stayed with me. What could I have done to prevent Miss Maria to have this problem? What is it that I could have done to prevent it? So I'm going to back up a little bit because kind of the slides were out of order. So these are the objectives. At the end of this talk, you will be able to list those risk factors that make elders vulnerable to have financial abuse, describe the common practices of abuse, and identify where you should refer them. And we will do this in 3 parts. So I apologize again, I'll go over the next one. So then answering these 3 questions. Number 1, what is the risk factors? Where are those risk factors for people to have abuse? How do you assess it? And what is the next step? Okay, a patient probably like Ms. Maria, what is the next step as a physician or a healthcare worker? So let's start. Elder abuse, believe it or not, its prevalence is around 4.3%, which is higher than heart failure. It's 1.3%, and similar to heart attacks. So this is very, very important. This is according to 2 national studies. Now, what are the risk factors? There are many, but I'm going to mention only 3 of them. All of them are related to mental health illness, okay? Depression, substance abuse, and mild cognitive impairment. And this is the first one is the one that I'm going to concentrate on, mild cognitive impairment, because it happens in 35% of people older than 71-year-old. So anybody here can comment on what is the definition of mild cognitive impairment? How do you diagnose it? By the way, I like to do it interactive, otherwise it's not, well, good. I see faces.
We do have a geriatric score sheet that we use on our patients, and it uses like a rapid cognition scale, and then it also bases their physical activity ability and their dietary changes throughout the past year.
Okay.
So, and then based on their answers, there's a numeric score they get that determines if there's mild, moderate, or severe dementia.
Excellent. I'm going to repeat for the interest of the audience in the web. You said we have a score sheet and a screening tool that it's a test, it's a screening test, and based on their ability to do certain things. And it says mild, moderate, and severe. So you are correct. That's the way we can screen for it. To diagnose it, we use 2 things, basically. Number 1, if they have some type of memory problem, memory complaint, which is something that you detect in this test. And number 2, if their activities of daily living are not affected, then that's mild cognitive impairment. Otherwise, but if it is affected, then these people may be in the category of dementia. Just wanted to make sure we understand, everybody knows what I'm talking about, mild cognitive impairment, so thank you. So these are the different stages. And I bring this up because in mild cognitive impairment, these people are 4 times more likely to make financial errors. And in my experience, the first instrumental activity of daily living that they lose is their ability to pay their bills. That's the first thing that the son takes over or the daughter takes over all the time. And they are right here at that point. And those are red flags, okay? At that moment, should alert you. Then another study showed that that financial capacity, basically, is determined if you do a memory test and they fail in their calculation and executive function test, those 2 are highly correlated to their financial capacity. So you know the slums or the rapid cognitive screening that you use when they fail the 100, the 23 and 77 answer, or if they fail the clock drawing test, which is the executive function. Those two should be also red flags for you. So what are the consequences? So think about this as a snowball effect, right? So first, you have the financial, the fraud happens. Then they cannot recuperate. They don't have time. They are retired. They don't have the energy to work again. So they don't have, they lose this money, right? Then they stop going to the doctor, and then they stop buying their medications. Where will they end up? In the emergency room. These people are 2 times more likely to end up in the hospitalized and 3 times more likely to end up in the skilled nursing facility. All right. And here are the references for you to look at it if you want. So now we'll do something fun. I would like you to look to your right or left and divide yourselves in pairs. And I want you to try to come up with a case, either your own personal experience or creative one. And this half of the room, these 2 tables basically, and you as well, we'll work on the first one. I want you to come up with a case that represents investment fraud. So these tables will work on undue influence. And the people connecting through the internet will work on the first one, investment fraud. So go ahead, I'll give you each 1 minute. Just come up with a case.
Well, the one I'm seeing, my father is in his 80s. My grandpa, I've been arrested.
Okay, I hope you came up with a good case. Anybody would like to share? Let's start with investment fraud, an example of investment fraud that you have seen. These were these 2 tables.
All right, so I had a grandmother who got dementia, and her son decided to move in with her and to take care of her, but then he would steal checks from her and buy himself things from QVC or TVs and alcohol.
So I will repeat for the benefit of the people connecting with us. So grandma had a son, they lived together, and the son took the money to buy things for himself, including alcohol. That's an excellent example. What about undue influence? Let's see, an example of undue influence. Go ahead.
I've actually got a patient that her daughter, who's pretty much been estranged from for most of her, or more of her adult life, had pretty much come in when she found out that her mom had her on the will, sold the house out from underneath her, and now she's living in almost more of a HUD type housing now.
Yeah, that's a really bad case, but it's not, she made, so I will repeat for the benefit of the audience, a daughter that came back, estranged daughter, came back to talk with grandma, and then grandma and the mother, the mother. And then the mother had her in the will, took all the money of the will, sold the house, and the mother is now in an institution.
Well,
Where is she?
institution yet, but she's in more low-income housing.
Income housing, yes. But did she influence the daughter influence the mom to put her in the will or not?
I think that she probably did, because she actually is the only child on that one, and she thought that her daughter was actually going to come back and live with her and take care of her.
So this was exactly, so that's the point that makes one different from the other, that a stranger or a family member comes in and convinces the person to use their money for their own benefit. Like the case I presented at the beginning, Miss Maria. And actually, there was a recent report back in just this December 2016, in the state, from the state of Virginia, a VA report. And it stated that most of the cases, in just 1 year, 2015, in 1 year, most of the cases were from relatives, caregivers, people that were very well known by the patient. So these practices are not unfamiliar to us. So let's move on to the second part of this. How can I assess? 3 things. Educate about advanced financial planning. Very, very important. We always hear about advanced care planning, right? I don't know if this is the first time you hear this word, financial planning. So it's very important because many of, especially people with dementia, when they are close to the end, will make very bad decisions if they don't have somebody already to help them, okay? Second step is to do a brief assessment or screening. So it's one simple question. So if you take something out from this talk, try to take one of the questions that we will talk about of how to assess your patients. Next will be give them the referrals, the resources that they need. Okay, so I'm going to concentrate only on the later two. So as I said, if you do like a new patient assessment or in your clinic, adding just a checklist will be enough to help you screen. And this is a brochure and a pocket that you can keep in your white coat. And it has all the red flags. It's just you hand it over, or you look for this in your patients, and it will help you. I think we have some copies. Is that right, Todd? You have some copies of this if you want to take this with you. And the brochure has the resources that are also in the slide. So what are these red flags? What are these risk factors? If the patient lives alone, the patient just lost a family member, and that family member was the main caregiver, definitely they are very high risk. Also, if the patient depends on, if the patient has dependence on other people. Let's say you have a patient that, for instance, always had the daughter as the caregiver, always the daughter. Out of the sudden, a nephew appears. You're like, okay. And he's saying that he is now the POA and all that. So that's a big red flag. Or if the patient always comes very well groomed, shaved, and out of the sudden you see a big change. They're not shaved. They're not wearing not wearing a makeup, not well. So those are red flags. Okay.
Radiology, please dial 1.
Now, this is an example of a Dr. Parker in the New York Times. He uses this pocket red flags that Todd just handed to you. And just recently in the BMC was published that healthcare professionals that receive this training that you are all receiving, this training helped them increase their judgment about financial abuse. So it's very, very useful. Now, these are some ways that you can introduce the topic. What other questions come to your mind that you may ask your patients? how you may introduce the topic to your patients. Anyone from the lab? No? Quiet crowd, huh?
Well, I had an actual thing happen. A call that came out of Jamaica to a friend of mine who had the phonics of her son copied on the phone. And they were able to use the phonics, and it really did fool her. And she sent $25,000 because he'd been kidnapped in Mexico. Two things didn't make any sense. So she talked to me before she did it again. They asked for more money to get him out of jail. Luckily, our FBI I could contact, she couldn't, and we did. Now, the problem was the first $25,000 was gone, and the FBI worked on the case. The sticker was, he was at home in bed in a town south in Missouri, asleep. Did not answer his phone when called 3 times. Luckily, the police went out and checked to see if he was all right. He's fine. So they got away with $25,000 because this is a very sharp lady who I thought would never make that mistake. She did.
Yeah, so ways you can, I'm going to repeat very briefly, a case of another example was a case of a lady, very sharp lady that you thought never happened. This was probably never happened, but someone used the phone of the son and called her and asked for money, and she did give $25,000. But you find out, for you that was very funny, so you called the FBI, and the FBI found out that this was a scam. So these are ways that you can introduce the topic. Who manages your money? Or do you ever run out of money at the end of the month? I have heard that one before. Have you ever give your power of attorney just recently to someone? Okay. So I encourage you, pick 1 or 2 questions that stay with you and then ask this to your patients with mild cognitive impairment or mental illness. Okay, so this is the rapid cognitive screening that you mentioned before. And the next step is to assess for cognition, all right? The first 2, the rapid cognitive screen and the mini-cog, are a 2 or 3 minute test, so you can use it very easily when you are even in hospitalized patients. And then if they are positive, then you can use a longer test like the MOCA or the SLUMS. So this is the rapid cognitive screening. It's a short version of the St. Louis University mental status exam. So it consists of asking the patient to recall 5 objects. Then you ask them to do the clock drawing test. Then you ask them to recall the 5 objects and then the story. If they score more than 5, is less than 5 is dementia. Less than 7 is mild cognitive impairment. Okay. Next, assess for financial capacity. So you can send the patient, if you have this patient that everything looks good, like this sharp lady that you mentioned, and you're like, let me just double check. So you can send them to a neuropsych test called financial capacity instrument. This is specially designed in patients with dementia. So even now there's a short version. So if you or anybody needs to use this instrument, you can contact Dr. Marson. Okay, let's summarize. So first you look for the risk factors. Then you ask a question and inquire more about how they're managing the money. And then you assess for cognitive function. Then you look, what is the next step? Give them some resources. So let's say that you assess the patient and they are at risk. So the next step is to do a full physical examination, neurological exam, as we just discussed. Then if they have some social needs like transportation problems, or they have problems paying certain things, you can ask the social worker to help with those things. And then these are the resources that you can provide to those people that are at risk, all right? For those that already, like the case that I mentioned at the beginning, Miss Maria, that already are people that are victims, you should do two things mainly. Number one, report the case to the state. And number two, I encourage them to seek for legal advice. In the case of Miss Maria that I mentioned at the beginning, my social worker discovered that they already went to the lawyer, to the bank, and they took care of all that. Sorry about that. So these are the resources that you can provide to those people that are victims of financial fraud. And this is the 1-800 number, and then this is the information of Todd, actually. Is that right? That's right. So now, another thing to look into are the caregivers. So if the caregiver is a male, lives with the patient, and is economically dependent on the patient, those are big red flags, so just be aware of it. Or if they have some mental health or substance abuse. If the patient, if this caregiver is also defensive or hostile toward your questions. So those are kind of traits of people that are more prone to financial abuse. Again, I cannot emphasize even more that you can prevent EIFFE. You can prevent elder abuse. So I would like you to jot down one thing you take away from this talk. From this part of the talk, actually, because the next part will be by Todd. Jot down one thing that you take away from anybody would like to share?
I have a question for you.
Yes.
A lot of times when you have people with dementia who are living with family members who are abusing them financially, you can't really recommend referral for that patient. So when you have these lists of these various things, it's not like the patient is able to call those people. And so then how do you manage it? You know the family is basically bleeding their finances dry. And
so who do you call when you know the family is financially abusing the patient and the patient doesn't want to do anything about it?
They are not mentally capable.
They have dementia, you said, yes. Right? They have dementia, they're not mentally capable. What do you do in those instances? That's a very good question. Any suggestions from the audience?
The problem is medical legally. What do you do? Rather than, you can call people, but then you can
hotline.
Well,
But they're not going to do a whole lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I've yet to call the state and have anything actually happen out of dozens and dozens of calls. So.
Todd?
You filled your application by calling the state. I don't know who you call. That's what I'm going to cover.
Yeah, he's going to cover that part, but that's a good question. So let me summarize before I leave. So remember, elders with cognitive impairment are higher risk for financial abuse. Encourage your patients, your elderly patients, especially the ones with mild cognitive impairment, to do some advanced financial planning. Assess this using the tools that I gave you, the questions, the rapid cognitive screening, and provide the resources. So now, without further ado, I leave you with, I was going to say Dr. Todd Hart, but Mr. Todd Hart. Thank you for your attention.
Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? My name's Todd Hurt. It's down there at the bottom. I'm not very important, but I'm with the Missouri Secretary of State's office, the Division of Securities. I'm going to go through my first 10 slides really quick because they're kind of made for undergraduate students, and you guys are doctors and stuff. the Securities Division is a division of the Missouri Secretaries of State. So we're going to cover two parts of this. What is the Secretary of State? That's the part we're going to go through really fast because you should know this. And what is a security? Which you should know too, but it's a little more complicated maybe than what you think. This is the definition from a financial dictionary of what a security is. It's really long and you don't have to read it. You won't have to know it. But basically, it's a stock or a bond, right? Stocks and bonds are what we think of as securities. Now, in our office, that gets extrapolated quite a bit. It's not necessarily, it is, but it's not necessarily what you would look at on the surface as a stock and bond. A layman's definition of a security is paying for a portion of a profit, or loss maybe, if you made a bad one, gained or lost from work you do not actually do, or it's also ownership of something you do not actually possess. So I'm just going to take an example here. Let's say I bought stock in Caterpillar, right? So I can say I own Caterpillar, but I don't really possess it, right? So that's an example. Ownership of something you do not actually possess. We're going to come back to this as soon as I cover what is the Secretary of State. So we all know the Constitution authorizes the executive branch of government, and the Secretary of State is the chief elections officer. They certify executive orders. They're responsible for storage of all historical documents, responsible for the registration of businesses. They're also the state librarian, and in the case of this presentation, act as the overseer of securities and securities transactions in our state. Let's stand over here. So where does the Secretary of State fit into our system of government? This is a question and answer session with undergrads. So we have the governor. Constitution says if we don't have a governor, we have a lieutenant governor, then President Pro Tem of the Senate, Speaker of the House, and the Secretary of State. So the Secretary of State is fourth in the line of succession from the governor. Who is Missouri Secretary of State? I can ask that. Does anybody know? Okay. In Missouri, it's Jay Ashcroft. Jay Ashcroft is our 40th Secretary of State. He's an engineer and attorney, and like me, he's a Jeff City J. Anybody else a Jeff City J? No? Okay. So notable Secretaries of State include John Edwards, Hamilton Gamble, Warren Hearns, and Matt Blunt. Why are they notable? Anybody know? They all went on to be governor. Another notable one is James C. Kirkpatrick. He's notable because they named the building after him. This is where I work in Jefferson City. He was the longest serving Secretary of State, 20 years, from the 60s to the 80s. I went to school in Warrensburg. He followed me up there. He was the librarian. They named the librarian after him and gave him an office in the library. So he used to be a state librarian and got demoted to college librarian. So what does the Secretary of State do? We kind of covered this. I'm going to go through them really quickly. Those are what they do. Last of all, securities. That's what we're here to talk about. This is where my office looks out at. You can see the Capitol over there. We're about a quarter mile west of the Capitol. Room 229 of the Kirkpatrick Information Building, in case you ever have to come see me. It's probably not a good situation if you have to. So now that you know who, what, and where, I'm going to talk a little bit about how and why. And I think that's going to answer some of the questions that you had earlier. First, why? Many people fall victim to financial violations. It's estimated that as much as $39 billion annually are taken from their rightful owner through exploitation of one way or the other. A portion, now not all, so we don't deal with all of it, but a portion of this total is security and trading related. How do we find out about these violations, which is kind of where we left off? So, one, the victim can tell us. In the case of our example, the victim couldn't tell us. Doesn't mean we're not going to be told by somebody. Usually somebody's going to run across that information. Maybe medical professionals, care providers. We have the hotline. We saw that before. Investor Protection Hotline. Secretary Ashcroft has opened this new unit, put me in charge of it, Vulnerable Citizens Unit. So when you call us, it may not be securities fraud related. In other words, they're not running an investment scheme or scam. But it's my job. I guess I didn't give you my background. I was a police officer for 25 years. The last 13 years, I was the Capitol Police Chief. So I dealt with all aspects of state government. In Jefferson City, the Capitol Police cover all the state buildings. So I made quite a few relationships, and I know a lot of people in state government. So we kind of can direct you to the right ones. Then we can kind of, you know, if you're not satisfied, we can call them back and say, hey, how's this investigation going, you know? So that's just something to keep in mind. I put my business cards over here. It's got that number on the back. You don't have to write it down or remember it, but you can take some if you want some. Also, we find out about securities fraud because of things like this, person-to-person interaction. I spend about 1 day every 2 weeks in the Capitol just talking to representatives and senators and say, you know, somebody's called you that they've got, you know, they're a victim. What are the calls? And so we get some that way too. Also online reporting on our website. It's on my card if you want it. But there it is, sos.mo.gov/securities. And I'll show you another slide that makes that easier. Well, you know, you may not be a victim. You made an investment, you're losing money. So it just happens, right? May not have been a victim. But how do you know? Well, you can always call the hotline and ask. We can check out a lot of things. Other ways to become aware of violations is somebody else tells us. These are known as referrals. Some examples of referring agencies are Department of Health and Senior Services. Day doesn't go by I don't talk to them on the phone. Attorney General's office, they have the Consumer Protection Hotline, so a lot of these get shifted over to us. Division of Finance, other state securities commissioner, every state in the union has a securities commissioner. Now, not all of them are under the Secretary of State's office. Ours just happens to be. Also, the SEC, which is not basketball, Securities and Exchange Commission, and FINRA, all right, Financial Institutions Regulatory Agency. There are also proactive measures we take to uncover violations. We do audits. We do self-initiated research. Yesterday, I listened to a financial show on the radio for an hour because somebody's trying to get people to cash in their government savings plan, federal savings plans, into their life insurance annuity, and he gets 10% of that. So can't do that. Educational events like this one today. Sometimes you know things that you want to tell me about, and it's productive, okay? So here's our website. This is Secretary of State's website. We're the third one over from the right, the drop-down menu. You can research all these things on here. The other way you can file a complaint is through the Safe Savings. It's still part of our website, and that's what it looks like. I'm going to read it up here. I know it's hard to see. When a violation is suspected, an investigation is open. Chapter 409 of the Missouri statute says the Commissioner of Securities may conduct an investigation into violations and regulatory matters. Important thing to remember with this is that everything is kept confidential, okay? So in the case, if we would have opened up the scenario with sending the money to Jamaica because they was in jail, which we wouldn't have because it's not securities related, but we'd have got it to the right person. But if it would have been in our office, we wouldn't have said the person's name that sent the money. We use MR1, MR2. Those stand for Missouri Resident 1, Missouri Resident 2. They're victims, okay? That's how we identify them in our suits. So there are three types of law that are dealt with. Everybody knows criminal and civil. We deal in administrative law. The advantages that we have on that kind of are what you were talking about earlier. We call somebody and nothing happened. Well, when I was a police officer, a lot of times I wrote a ticket, I sent it to the prosecutor, and nothing happened. You know, it just doesn't happen because that's the way it is. Because there has to be a charging prosecutor, and then it has to go to the circuit court, and if they still don't like it, it goes to the appellate court, right? So civil is kind of the same way. If you sue somebody or somebody sues you, there has to be a plaintiff, an attorney to file it. It goes through adjudication in the circuit court, and then it goes back to the appellate court if necessary. So ours is a little bit different. We're completely administrative. Even the Department of Social Services has to go that way. We're a little different. We have, our enforcement section is comprised of investigators. There's 14 people in my office. 5 of them are investigators. So we investigate an allegation. If it's securities related, we're going to get pretty deep into it. We find a violation, we're going to give that to our Director of Enforcement, who files a formal charge with our Commissioner of Securities. The Commissioner of Securities is on the title slide, David Minnick. He's the one that adjudicates this. All this is done in-house. We don't have to worry about local politics or other things like that. It's all done in-house. I'm going to show you, if I have time, I'm going to get there intentionally, go fast, some examples of orders of adjudication. If they have an appeal there, it doesn't go to appellate court, it goes to the Administrative Hearing Commission. They still have a beef, then they can get to circuit court. So the advantages are we can require the production without a warrant of papers, books, correspondence, memos, agreements, other relevant documents, as long as they're securities related, or we can tie in securities some way or another. So, like I said before, rule of due process applies to criminal law, right? There has to be a suspected violation, and the police officer has to fill out a probable cause affidavit, take it to the prosecutor gives it to the judge, and the judge assures that an unreasonable search is not occurring. So administrative law, under the securities provision, under Section 409, provides for an audit without a warrant. We can go in and search records, documents, any other thing. Sometimes it even produces a criminal violation, which these things we do have to take to court. Stealing by deceit, forgery, financial exploitation are examples of those. Why can this happen? Because the security law under 409 was specifically created to target criminals of paper crimes that deal in these fake schemes. Also, let's say that we wanted to get the records of somebody running a Ponzi scheme. A Ponzi scheme is actually going out and selling securities without ever putting the money in the stock market. You just keep getting money in, and every once in a while you send out a letter saying your money is doubled or whatever, so they get more people coming in. So if something like that occurs, then we started an investigation. Anything or anytime we send out a request for information because of a securities violation, it is illegal for the person that receives this letter to alter, destroy, mutilate, conceal, make false entry, or by any means falsify from any place or withhold any record or document. So what happens, like whenever I used to catch kids with a little bit of weed, you know, they just throw it away, right? Or they flush it down the toilet. Well, not in this case. That's a severe penalty. So they're stuck between a rock and a rock. 3 most common grounds for discipline investigated by the Securities Division: filing a false or incomplete application with the commissioner. In other words, they have to register if they're going to sell securities. Failing to reasonably supervise their agents. So if a broker has agents out there in the field doing his work for him, he has to make sure that they're doing it right. Also, dishonest or unethical practices, which is fraud. We're going to talk about that a little bit more here. So register. Who has to register and why? Applications are lengthy and detailed for a reason. People that are investing in a stock or a venture or real estate or commodities, they need to know where their money is going and why. By answering detailed questions, the seller demonstrates this understanding, and once this detailed application is approved, it must be followed exactly. Not abiding by the intent of this offering is a violation. So, who must register? Broker-dealers, broker-dealer agents, investment advisors, and investment advisor representatives. Anybody that's going to give financial advice about a stock or bond or some kind of traded security, a commodity, has to be registered. A broker-dealer is somebody that actually, they will sell it. They don't have to give you advice, but they'll take your money and say this is where it's at. An investment advisor is more of a fiduciary. They're going to take charge, look at your financial situation, and tell you where to put the money. The fifth thing, an issuer agent. Let's say that we wanted to go build some apartment buildings here in Kirksville, because there's a lot of students, right? And we can make some money off of rent. So I want to get, some investors together and have an investment opportunity for people to invest in my apartment buildings and maybe make some money on the long run on the rent. So I would have to, before I did that, I would have to fill out an application, get it approved by the securities before I move forward with it. Now, there's a lot more other rules and some exceptions to that, but that's basically what it means. And the last thing is supervise, failing to reasonably supervise broker-dealer agents and investment advisors. So the broker-dealers have to supervise their agents, investment advisors have to supervise their representatives. Because the basic income source for securities ventures are commissions and fees, and at each level of such securities operations, there are temptations for self-indulgences. Do you really want to, or this person wrote me a check for $10,000, maybe I'm only going to invest $9,900. You know, let's take a little off the top. So that's an example, but unlike in all situations where parents are not responsible for their children, well, in this case, parents are responsible for their children. They have to obey their parents and the rules. So they're responsible for these things. And these are things that you might run across in seeing patients. Investments are suitable. So if somebody's going to sell a maturing annuity 20 years to somebody that's 85, that's not suitable. They have to be suitable for the person that they're selling to. Only authorized transactions are completed. In other words, the person who is in charge of the money is that person who owns it. They have to be able to have the ability to authorize transactions. Provide information concerning only reasonable expectations. So in other words, hey, look, this stock is going to make 20% over the next 2 years. That's not reasonable. You can't do that. They have to make sure that their agents avoid complex investment processes and ensure fees and expenses are reasonable for the service provided. They got to make their money. They just have to be reasonable. When these things do not occur, then we have fraud or unethical practices. Also known as the security industry and many other terms, such as affinity fraud, theft from brokerage accounts, internet and email investment scams, Ponzi pyramid schemes, talked about them a little bit, oil and gas structures, coins and precious metals. So I'm going to skip this video because it's going to take up all my time. If you have a chance to watch it online on your own, it's under thesafeinvestment.org. You can pick that up. I'm going to give you some tips on how to spot and how to give advice to those you care for on how to spot a con artist. A lot of times there's going to be promises with high rewards and no risk and a lot of returns. High pressure sales techniques, we've got 10 of these, 8 of them are gone. Spelling and grammatical errors in their leaflets and their brochures and their handouts. They don't really have anybody looking over them to double check. So there's going to be errors. The offer is only for a select group. So they're targeting a certain group, like somebody you go to church with, certain employees, things like that. They need a response within the next 30 days or it's no good anymore. Pressure for an immediate response. They require an advance payment. We need you to invest in this now. The opportunity is running out. Cash only, that's a real big red flag. I mean, can you go to the ATM and get out $10,000? No. Checks made out personally to the person. Promise to provide paperwork later. They'll often ask for personal information, which may or may not be necessary. Or they'll ask you to sign blank forms or documents. Big red flag. Inability to contact an independent agency or representative. Like, who do you work for? Offers that are just too good to be true. If it's too good to be true, it's probably not legit. Self-defense tips. Before you buy, check the background of anyone trying to sell you securities with the Missouri Secretary of State's division. That's the number. It's on my business card over here too. Now, what you can do is call us with the person's name that's trying to give you a sales pitch here on any type of investment. We can immediately look them up, run a report on them, tell you if there's any actions that somebody's had. I just did one the other day. The guy, I mean, he's probably pretty legit, but he did have a tax lien. So any little things that come up, they have to report it to us, and it becomes a public record because they're in this business. That's how transparent and open these things need to be. Don't accept statements from your manager alone. Verify with the firm. Double check. Don't send money directly to the manager. Make out checks to the brokerage account. Never invest on reputation or word of mouth. A lot of times these people are going to have the corner office, the big expensive cars, because they want you to think they're legit. All right, just check them out. They may be. Check them out. Monitor your investments. Ask tough questions. Look for trouble retrieving your principal profit. If you get into an emergency, it should have been worked out ahead of time, so you should know if you can get your money. If it's a liquid account, you need to be able to get that money out when you need it. Don't let embarrassment keep you from reporting fraud. This is what you're going to see a lot, really. I mean, they were the rock of the family. They made this money. It's theirs. If for some reason they lost it or lost control of it, it's an embarrassing situation. Like I said before, our investigations are confidential. Whenever you call our office, it's a confidential call. Read and understand your monthly statements. Report any problems immediately. Unknown caller offering investment product, just hang up. New one we ran across the other day, you're getting these emails, and it says if you no longer want to receive these emails, push here to not accept them, or let us know. I can't remember what exactly it says. But the reason they're doing that is because now they know somebody's sitting on the other end of the computer. Just delete them. Don't even say, I don't want to receive them anymore, or put them in junk mail. So I'm just going to give you three case examples. These are from just the last 2 months, what our office has done. Okay, respondent shall be paid $12,000 to Missouri Education Protection Fund. Respondent shall jointly and severally pay $25,000 to Missouri Secretary of State's Investor Education Fund. Respondent is ordered to pay $50,000 to the Investor Education Protection Fund. So I'm not here today on your dime. I'm here on the bad guy's dime. That's who I work for, Secretary of State's Missouri Education Fund. So I think I did it in time allotted. I got a couple minutes for questions. I'll be glad to answer any.
So were those last things you showed us real?
Yes, those are right. And those are just portions of them. Those are like 30-page adjudication documents. But you can go. Well, yeah, but believe me, these people know about it. Yeah, I mean, they signed the documents. And you can go on our website and look at the full document. It's a published public record. It's out there. And all you got to do is go into enforcement and say recent decisions on there. They're all there. I think actually, yeah, I did put some of these up here. So here's where you can check your broker right here. If you go to enforcement, it's going to show you all those recent decisions. This is an example of broker check, something we can do for you or you can do yourself. I just typed in Tom Smith on this one, and Tom Smith's a pretty common name. That's why I picked it. But you can see right there, this Tom Smith is permanently barred. He did something wrong. So sometimes we actually do our job.
I just wanted to ask you, because I got this question from one of my presentations. These services that your office provide is free of cost, you know, the lawyers and things like that. Sometimes they don't want to go over the trouble to contact the state because they don't have the money to pay to the lawyers.
Right. We represent, and you're exactly right, Dr. Cruz, but remember, we represent the state of Missouri and fair investment practices. Part of what's going to happen is there's going to be restitution and things like that ordered as a result of our process. But we don't represent anybody specifically. We represent the state and victims of these kinds of situations. So, yeah, we're going to order restitution when these cases are adjudicated and pay the fund. We can also make them pay the money back for the investigation. And, you know, a lot of times what we'll do, you'll see if you read through these orders, they'll find $100,000, $50,000 of it's suspended if they make all their payments, they do everything right. So that's kind of how we do it. Any other question? Good question, Dr. Cruz.
Can you explain how your son gets search warrants and things like that?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. It can be. The Constitution put that in place for a reason, right? We're supposed to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. This is only if you're taking advantage of a securities transaction. Okay, if you're posing as somebody or an actual securities company, you have to register and you have to make those things available. You have to make it known. And as simple as it is, I'm going to try and simplify this a little bit. Okay, so when you buy a fishing license, you're consenting to a search of a conservation agent. Does that make sense? So when you buy a securities license, you're consenting to that search. Or you transact illegally, then you're going to get it's in the law that those can occur. It has to be specific to that jurisdiction. That's a good question because I kind of oversell that sometimes. I really like that because as a police officer, that was the blocks I ran into.
In medicine, if you participate in Medicare, you're consenting to search of all your records and documents related to your Medicare billing.
Very good example. Very good example. Any other questions? Thank you very much. Great group. Good questions.